congratulate me for remembering the microphone. Mm. So we had some discussions about Pivik yesterday in the breakout sessions, and there was the question of whether it's possible to sort of segment the users. For instance, find the referrals from people coming from certain location, and I couldn't make it work at that time. But then in the evening, I had the aha moment, and there is actually a pretty powerful feature in Pivik. It's not really friendly for doing an ad hoc query for something, but there is this kind of segment feature on the top where you can have some predefined segments and you can add your own. So it's possible, for instance, to add a segment, say, foreign users. And this is now our live system in Finland. Let's say that we have like visit location country is not FI. So everyone coming from other places. And now we are running with this filter for other users. And now this allows you to check out everything. So it's not just something against something, but you can also go like to the referrals page, check out all the referrals, and it's still just for the foreign users. So it's pretty powerful, and you can have like predefined groups that you will use every time. It's actually pretty interesting because I haven't been looking at this before. But just so you know, it's there and it's possible to do. And there is apparently a paid plugin you could use to have like to do some queries based on these segments, but it was something that provided by Pivik Pro or something like that. But I think this works for many occasions quite fine. It may take some time to do if you have like a longer period of time, but it seems to me that it's working quite nicely, even if it's doing the processing in real time. And like with other statistics, Pivik allows you to also do the segments in the background, so you can have a cron task to update the segments instead of doing it in real time in the UI. So that's about it. I have nothing else. Thanks. Certainly.
Is there any interest in doing more within the Viewfind community for doing kind of more secondary, ternary type queries into the data? I mean, here you've got a secondary filter, but I'm thinking, just because I know I'm our data analytics person, so for our organization, and as we were talking yesterday, we do a lot of split this by country and then by refer, and then let's take a look at this or that. And I'm just wondering if there's a need for best practices guidance on. I can at least talk to Google Analytics or something like that. I don't know if there's any for some tips and tricks for doing more in depth than I love what this does.
I suppose you could have like a UI.
Like something to put on the wiki or something.
Yeah,
like
you could have like instructions in the wikis for some useful queries using the Pivik API, for instance. And of course, you could. This also allows you to segment by many other things, like there is the or and conditions. So you can do it here with something that's more permanent in a more permanent way.
Yeah.
But I suppose if you wanted to, you could write a Viewfind admin module thing to support like Pivik queries to your Pivik server and then display them nicely.
It might be useful to summarize the question for the internet audience.
Okay, so now that we have been talking about it for a couple of minutes, we could summarize it. And I don't remember the original question anymore.
Mine was just, is there an interest in like adding to the Viewfind wiki some best practices or ideas on how to get analytics out of Pivik and
Yeah.
analytics?
Yeah, so the question was about adding some best practices or instructions to WooFind Wiki, for instance, for how to get the certain kinds of analytics information out of PVIC. It would be nice to know, because there are some things that are easier or harder to get out of it than others. Anyone else? Okay, thanks.
So, this was everyone seemed to like the picture that I started my talk with yesterday. A user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not very good. There was another segment of my talk that I cut because it felt mostly unrelated, about the asset pipeline that was new. And it all was inspired by this talk called The Web Obesity Crisis, which is by this man whose name I will not attempt to pronounce. But he goes by @BaconMeteor on Twitter. But he gave this incredible, it's like a 50-minute talk, or it's a web page, it's linked in the share doc, about the web obesity crisis, which he summarizes very hilariously as by pointing out different problems. The idea is that the web used to be really simple, but the more multimedia and like entertainment centered it's become bigger and bigger. And he makes it his point through a very long and like biting but funny talk. So this article about the growing average page size is half the size of the one from the next year. That was the same article but updated with the numbers for the next year. It was twice as big. So if present trends continue, there's a real chance that articles warning about page bloat could exceed 5 megabytes by 2020. To put that into perspective, he made this modest proposal that your website should not exceed the size of any of the major works of Russian literature. And he says that's actually really kind. There's some very, very long books of other, but he picked a Russian because it seemed a little more reasonable. And his example is that this tweet, the page that this tweet is on, is about 900 kilobytes, which is 100 kilobytes larger than the full text of The Master and Margarita, Bulgakov's funny and enigmatic novel about the devil visiting Moscow, complete with a giant cat, The Great Purge of 1937, intercut with an odd vision of the life of Pontius Pilate, Jesus Christ, and the devoted but unreliable apostle Matthew. All of that giant Russian book is smaller than the page that this one tweet was put up on. Another example was for the iPhone 6, a page that if you scroll through it has a lot of pretty pictures, but only like 5 to 6 sentences on it. The entire page took up more memory than the space shuttle had. Not just the first space shuttle, all the space shuttles, that Apple computer, the first Apple computer, with enough room left over for all the works of William Shakespeare, on a page that had 6 sentences on it. This page from Facebook was my favorite example, because one of my favorite examples, because this is a page about slow internet and bad internet connection throughout the world. It's not possible that this giant globe picture is actually a giant video that's over 20 megabytes that's just there to make the Earth spin, but it's true. This website is enormous, and if your website is slow, you actually won't really be able to enjoy this page because you'll be waiting for this giant video to load on a web page about bringing internet to more people. This page from Google about new accelerated mobile pages, which is a new fast way to get pages load faster and be pretty on mobile, is actually technically infinite in size, because there's that image there with the archway is actually a carousel that, due to a bug in the coding, will reload itself completely again when it's finished. So if you sat in this page forever, the page would take up more and more memory on your computer, infinite in size. So he starts to talk about funny ways to solve this, and one of my favorite tool that he came up with was you do something called the Taft test. This is William Taft, America's greatest president by volume. And if your web page is just as fun and just as entertaining and just as useful, if you replace all the pictures with pictures of our most visually glorious president, maybe you don't need them. He outlines a very, very difficult to follow 2-step process to get web pages down in size. Make sure that the most important content is loaded first so that your users can see what they need immediately and as fast as possible, and then stop. I wanted to put this in my slide yesterday. As you can see, all this background would kind of cluttered and kind of derailed my talk a little bit, but as the food pyramid of web pages, you have text worth reading, markup, your bolding, your italics, to make it even more, like the text pop a little more. Some images, make it pretty, compress them properly, use them nicely, then use your CSS to make it nice. And if you're good, you can use a little bit of scripting. This is something I'm still working on for Viewfind, but it's a far reach from what he sees the rest of the page, the web as, which is all the useful stuff's down here, and most of what you load onto a page is completely useless. And then, of course, Google Analytics and other surveillance things tend to take up a lot of page. How is Viewfind doing? This is a blank search on the demo page that's up. We're coming at around 737 kilobytes, just shy of a single tweet for all the images, which isn't bad. I don't think we have the asset pipeline, the new feature, activated, so things get better with that. But we also did find a problem recently where our pages were also technically infinite in size because we were reloading the reCAPTCHA library over and over again. So the asset pipeline is a really great place to start. But I wanted to talk about, this is background to like the sudden conclusion of my talk. There was a talk a while ago called BYOB, which is Build Your Own Bootstrap. And Dave Lacey, who was with us, really wanted me to look into this. And I decided that overall, this isn't an option for Viewfind. Because again, the users are the developers. And if I start taking pieces out of Bootstrap that I don't think we need, someone will inevitably need them. So we're loading in the entire Bootstrap library, which is carousels and dropdowns and pop-ups and modals and slideshows and carousels. And there's a lot to Bootstrap, which is what makes it so great and easy to use, but it's so much. It's just a lot of CSS. It's a lot of JavaScript. And a lot of it isn't used in core, and a lot of it isn't used by other libraries. This is actually a CSS library that I wrote and used myself. This is the entire column system that you would need for the 12 columns of Bootstrap. This is 460, I think, 3 bytes. And this is what I use for my own projects all the time. And this is so much smaller, and this is one of the things that people come to Bootstrap for, is for the columns. But Bootstrap's columns are at 1% of the entire file size, and the rest is more or less useless. So I literally made this talk this morning, so this is the sudden crashing conclusion, but check out the talk. There's a talk from Code for Lib a few years ago, but there's also a talk by the man, Mark Otto, who made Bootstrap, about building your own Bootstrap. And I wanted to encourage everyone to look into options of making your own solutions to things. And speaking of making your own solutions to things, I think Damien's next with a lightning talk about channels, where I made my own slider because I couldn't find one that worked properly. So don't be afraid to build your own systems to help solve the crisis. Thank you. The link to the entire Web Obesity Crisis talk is in the Share Docs, and it's under recommended reading, and I highly recommend it. The video is a hilarious 45 minutes.
And here I am ready to give a live demo with no particular plan. So, I've talked about this a few times on the developers call, but I thought it might be better to show it to a room full of people to get some reactions. I was told that it would be useful to have a visual way of browsing through Viewfind results here at Villanova, because as our stacks diminish and the books become less physically browsable, it would be really nice to have an interface to let patrons explore the collection in ways other than through search. And Viewfind already has a few browsing options. It has the alphabetical browse. It has the sort of hierarchical segmented browse, but they're somewhat limited in some ways. They're not particularly visual. I mean, the hierarchical one is more visual than the alphabetical one. But anyway, I thought about it for a while, and the first thing that came to mind was Netflix and other things that follow this model of giving you channels of content that are based on what you're doing and then let you sort of explore in a nonlinear fashion through there. This in turn led me to the idea of creating a module in Viewfind whose purpose is to display channels of content and then build a plugin system where you can build classes that feed the channels. So initially, I've created 2 channel providers, one which uses facets. So when you do a search, it just takes the facets, picks some random ones, and then gives you the records that match those facets. And I wrote another one that uses Solr's similar items mechanism for making recommendations. But obviously, there are lots of other things that you could be doing, like using APIs like Novelist or some other commercial things that are out there, or doing cross-search backend searches. But anyway, the idea of the channels thing that I've built so far is that it can start with either a single record or a search query, and then it just builds channels from there. So I'll show you what it looks like today. And it definitely still needs some work, and that's one of the reasons I'm showing it to you, is to get some ideas about refining the interface. But so here's what happens if I do a search for dime novels. I get a fatal error because this is a live demo. This worked. This worked before we were on the live stream. I'm going to guess that Solr has gone offline. Oh, what happened? That must be it. All right. So when it actually works, as you can see, we have some channels. At the top, we have the facet-related ones. And I made this configurable, and I configured it to take the topic and author facets and just pick the first 2 values from each of those fields. And then below those, it uses the similar items feature. It takes the first 2 records from the initial search results and shows all the things that are similar to those. So this has sort of taken one search and turned it 2-dimensional by exploring some of the facets and records within there. And of course, each of these things has a scroller. So I think we have about 20 items in each channel. And also, each channel, when, as I said, it's limited to show just 2 of each kind of thing, but it knows that there are more options available, so we have this add more channels like this, and I can choose all the other facet values that we didn't have room for. So, let's look at the World War I things, and then it just plugs in another channel that I can explore. Also, each channel has 2 buttons, which we've really struggled to name and label. But they're useful if we can figure out how to convey their use. So this thing that we currently have a magnifying glass on basically starts a new set of channels based on this channel. So to put it another way, this applies the facet to the search and then generates a new set of facets out of that. So if we click there, now we're searching for dime novels faceted to World War I fiction, but we now get a new set of channels because different facets have risen to the tops of the lists. The other button to the left of this is the take me to the actual records that are in this channel. So if I click here, I actually go to the search with that facet applied, and now I can proceed in the normal viewfind fashion. So this is a little bit confusing because if I do that on one of these facet channels, it takes me to search results. But if I do that on one of these similar items channels, it actually just takes me to the record that the channel is similar to because it's taking me to the source of the information. So that is essentially all I have to show right now. Oh, I didn't know that was a feature. Look at that. That's a feature. I'm not sure why this has escaped like this, but that's probably just a characteristic of this index. In fact, I know that's the case. So that's not a problem. That's a local issue, not a bug.
Also, clicking just the Add More Channels button does fix the top 2 from the list if users aren't sure.
Yes, so if we just hit that, we get these Dutch World War I spy-related dime novels. So I think we're actually getting pretty close to the point where we can merge this into master as an experimental feature, but I would really like to make this UI a little bit more polished before rolling it out, particularly with regard to those confusing buttons. So feel free to think about it or make suggestions. Is this also touch friendly, Chris?
Yes.
Cool.
You can drag and flick it, or it's still, if you, yeah.
Oh yeah, there we go.
It now also works on mobile. And it also responds really well if you shrink it down. It doesn't freak out about, like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and
Very nice.
It'll still page properly too. It won't like send you past ones that you might miss.
So I think one of the things that's currently on our agenda is moving the buttons around so that we have only one row of controls instead of having these two up here and the rest down here. Is that correct? And
Most likely bringing the top ones down.
right.
Still not sure.
This is really interesting, because I think anyone who's been dealing with taking books out of the stacks and into any kind of storage has been trying to figure out how to do this.
Right.
When your faculty and students have been trained for so long to do their serendipitous browsing in the stacks, and this is something we've looked at, and the best we've ever done is browse lists. So this is really cool. Applause to you guys.
Thank you, thank you. And you know, I also think this is, because of the way it's designed with plugins that generate the channel content, there's sort of the infinite potential to do this better and try new things. But at the same time, I'm impressed that I took the two most obvious, simplest things, and already just playing with it, it does pretty good results. I'm sure some searches work better than others, but it also addresses the problem that facets are really powerful, but nobody really uses them. If you do user testing, the power users might, but most people just ignore them. And this takes that power and just shoves it in your face so you can't miss it.
And at the same time, you know, it's presented in a way that the users have a sense of what they're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, as I say, Netflix came to mind, and that's what's been training people. This is an interface that is now very familiar. There are all kinds of things that do this I mean, it's largely associated with entertainment, but why not?
You know, so I also think this is exciting and a welcome feature. I would encourage more support for explicit curation, which is a real strength of a lot of librarians. I so enjoy going into the library and seeing the curated new books area. And that's certainly doable right now, just as a web page, but making that process easier would be welcome.
Right, and for the stream, the comment was from the back of the room, it would be nice to have support for explicit curation here, and there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do that. I mean, the biggest challenge to think about is how do you contextualize explicit curation in combination with people looking at specific records and doing searches. But you certainly could say, this is an explicitly curated channel I always want to show, or you could have something set up that says, if these keywords are in the search, show this stuff, or for this record, show this stuff.
Well, maybe on a related note, with that, specifically with that idea of the new books list, what would it be like to feed, to create a new books channel for the month of October? I mean, how are the channels fed? Can they just be fed by a list of record identifiers? I don't know.
Right.
It's a question.
Yeah, the question is, what would it take to do something like a channel for new books for the month of October? And yeah, that would be very easy to do. And a follow-up question was, how are the channels fed? And right now, it's extremely simple. It's just an array, which I think has a link to the record, a title, and a thumbnail URL. So you just write a class that generates those arrays and puts them out, and it displays them. So for new books, certainly you could have a channel that just takes the current search and filters it by things that were added in the last month, done, if you're indexing your modification dates anyway. And for curation, you could do something like have a channel that looks up favorite lists, and then we could utilize the existing public list functionality to populate channels. That would be pretty easy to do. And as I say, part of the goal here is to make this very configurable, so it should be easy to mix things around and prioritize. There are also things that we could consider doing at a higher level to improve this, like going through all the channels and deduplicating them so that we don't have the same book in multiple channels. I don't know if that's beneficial or if that makes things worse, though. Right now, I haven't done it. Obviously, one challenge here is speed, because potentially we're doing a whole bunch of searches on one page rather than just one. So there are some limits there, and that's certainly part of the reason we're only showing 2 of each kind of channel and then letting people load more by Ajax as needed. There might also be the possibility of caching some of this stuff to improve the speed, since it's such a simple data structure and we're reducing the search results down to that. But the question there is, how often are people going to be doing the same search here that we'd benefit from a cache, or is that just a waste of effort? But only use and statistics will answer that.
Going back to the Netflix model, have you thought about having standard channels? So like if you look at Netflix, you have the top trending, you've got the new releases, you've got your own list, you've got all the different topics, and then so have that as your first higher level, and then they can then search within that, and then it's a little more obvious, and then maybe at the top for the users say, we're in this searching for that. So for users it's a little more intuitive that they can dive into specific topical areas rather than searching on each list to refresh the whole thing, and then maybe you only have them searching through one list at a time rather than through several on one page. Just an alternate idea.
For the stream, this was sort of a long thing that I'm sure I'm going to miss some of the details of, but the idea was of having like a starting point with fixed channels that leads users deeper into the experience. And certainly that is something that's missing right now. I've created the mechanism to display the channels, but I haven't really thought out how people get here in the first place. And that is an obvious answer that what we probably should do, and I think this is something we should do before we consider merging this, is in addition to, right now we have channels search and channels record, we should also have channels home. That's just hard-coded channels that start you off and guide you, oh, I can get more channels about a record, I can search from here, but here are the top trending things, or yours, or whatever. But then we have 3 sets of configurable channels in play that people can set up. The starting channels, the channels we give them for a search, and the channels we give them for a record. And I think that really gives us a lot of power to play around with.
Well, there's something Layla said made me also think, what would a search within this channel be like? I mean, to be able to use something like the facet channel just as you're launching into a search that's pre-limited by topic novel specimens, so that becomes your universe of searching. And then probably wind up with funny interface issues, but to let someone search within a channel, especially like a curated channel, if those things can be fed by the data, that could be intriguing.
Right. So the comment there was, how do you search within a channel? That brings up some interesting user interface questions, because different channels are going to have different characteristics. And the way this is handled sort of in the data model is that each channel returns 2 URLs, one for doing a search within the channel and one for getting more information about where the channel came from. And they're both optional, so if you don't include them, those buttons just don't appear. So for something like a completely curated channel where you can't manipulate it in any way as a user, you would probably exclude those links, or you could point them to an about page or something. But that's where the labeling for, we have these 2 kinds of links, And there's usually something that makes sense to put in these boxes for each channel, but how you label the box is challenging.
But going back, I support this idea of using the existing list functionality. That's something we could give to the library, and it seems like an implementation side of them appreciate more. That'd be great.
So that was more support for the idea of using the existing list feature as a way of populating channels, and definitely something we could do. It would be very easy to create a configuration where you say, show this list ID as a channel with this name. So I think my next step will be I'll work on creating the channel homepage, because that's the logical place to put that kind of hard-coded, curated content. I can then create the list channel, and then we can continue to brainstorm whether there's also the possibility of dynamically selecting lists based on other criteria to put that into deeper parts of the interface. But at least having it in one starting page is a start. And that would also give us the option, if we wanted to, of making that ViewFind's homepage in place of the current, columns of browse by facet values. We could actually have the channels right up front. All right.
Need a random channel generator.
Yes, yes. Well, there is, in fact, a feature in Solr to retrieve random records, and ViewFind is configured to support it. There's an existing recommendation module that you can turn on that will put random records at the top of your search results. So we could create a random channel. That would be very easy. I support it. All right. Was that a comment or no? All right. Well, I think we are done with Lightning talks. So,
Has anyone felt inspired?
all right. Well, thank you very much.